Wonder Woman saves the DCEU. The DCEU is saved by Wonder Woman, or she's contributed to saving it for the moment. That is what the public sentiment out there is saying. And I'm just going to tell you guys right now, the DCEU never needed saving. But let's just go with what they're coming from, which is just one aspect of the DCEU. They're talking about the critical response to the DCEU so far. If you do remember, Batman v Superman got a 27% on Rotten Tomatoes, which means 27% of the critics actually liked the movie. Man of Steel, the movie before, had a 55% on Rotten Tomatoes. 55% of the critics liked that movie. So anything below 60% is rotten of the critics, so it was considered rotten as well. And then Suicide Squad, I think, had the lowest rating altogether, 26%. So as we progressed, less critics liked the DCEU movies. This is according to Rotten Tomatoes. It doesn't tell you their scores, but it does tell you how many critics liked it or disliked it. When we look at, say, for instance, Metacritic actually gives you an average of the scores that different critics actually gave for the movie. In this case, Man of Steel, 55%, just like Rotten Tomatoes, 55% of the critics liked the movie. But in this case, it means something different. It actually means the actual score the movie got from 47 critics. The average score was 55. Whereas in Rotten Tomatoes, it's not giving you a score, it's just telling you how many of the critics scored it a 6 out of 10 or more. Okay? That's all that meant. Now, Batman v Superman on Metacritic got a 44%, which is still a mixed a set of reviews. You see, it says here mixed or average reviews based on 51 critics. Okay, so more critics actually assessed this film than Man of Steel, and both again got mixed responses. For this time, 44% was the average score. Rotten's like, I think, 30-something%, like 39% or lower. Suicide Squad, again, a mixed response, 40% by 53 critics. So more critics progressively started scoring these movies as the DCU moved along. Okay? Whereas on Rotten Tomatoes, with like 26% of the critics actually liked the movie. I think it was with Batman v Superman, I think it was 27 or 28%. And Man of Steel, I believe it was 55%, okay, of the critics actually liked the movie. So progressively, the critical response was getting less and less favorable with these movies. If this is what people are talking about, that the DCEU is failing, I would say that in terms of critical response now, Wonder Woman seems to be changing that. 49 critics, 76%. That is a favorable reviews generally by 49 critics. Okay, and I think on Rotten Tomatoes right now, there's 93% of the critics like the movie. That doesn't mean that they scored it highly. I think the average score right now is 7.5 out of 10, if I'm not mistaken. So that's round about this figure. Okay. And when you look at Suicide Squad, I think it's the average score for Suicide Squad, according to the critics, if I'm not mistaken, was 5 point something out of 10 or something like that. So it's a little bit higher. And Batman v Superman, I think it was 6.5 out of 10. Okay? 6.5 thereabouts. So I don't know for Man of Steel. I didn't really look. Alright, so anyway, my point is that the favorable scores were a certain amount. So when you look at the critical response for these movies, a lot of people base it on Rotten Tomatoes. And they say, oh, it's rotten. It's not mixed at all. It's rotten. Okay? But when we look at Metacritic, we get a better perspective. Alright? But critical response is not what determines if a universe succeeds or fails. Critical response is just one element of it. What we have to really look at, what is the thing you have to really pay attention to, is audience response for these films. Audience response. Man of Steel's audience response, I think, was 75%. I believe Batman v Superman somewhere around 65%. of the audience on Rotten Tomatoes. And I think Suicide Squad, if I'm not mistaken, is currently at somewhere around 63-64%. My point being, if the audience takes to the film, that is what determines its success. Now, the critics have something to do with the enthusiasm audiences will have for a film. I think with Wonder Woman, currently, it's very early in the games, I think it's 93% of the audience actually like the film. What their actual scores are a totally different thing. I think most people will assess Wonder Woman as a 7.5 out of 10. Okay? Kind of like around Man of Steel, which would make sense. Now, another factor that determines, this is what really determines the future of a universe, at least when we talk about Warner Brothers. Warner Brothers, like I kept on explaining to people in another video, Warner Brothers actually continued on with the DCEU because of Man of Steel. Now, you have to understand how difficult it is to do a Superman movie. I think a lot of people do not understand how difficult the Superman movie is. You have to understand, Superman, after 1978, as much as people like Superman 2, it was almost a flop. Okay? Critically, box office wise. Superman 3 and Superman 4 were flops. Box office flops. Superman Returns was a box office flop. So, what I'm saying to you is this, that box office, and only box office, determines the future of a universe. Green Lantern was a box office flop. So the DCEU never was started. Batman and Robin was a box office flop. It took 7-8 years before we had another Batman movie. If you want to see the DCEU universe fail, you have to have box office flops. I mean, plenty of examples of franchises which continue onwards, even though they have been critically assessed bad. We have Transformers, we have the Fast and the Furious series. We got a number of different movies, right? Where critical reception was horrible, but these movies did well at the box office because the audience liked the movies, though the critics didn't. And critics only make up, if so much, 300 or 400 people versus millions of people that actually see a movie and then rate it. Okay? So, when we look at box office, Man of Steel, 668 million. Home market, total domestic video sales, $110 million. That's more than Captain America Civil War. That's more than Avengers Age of Ultron and a ton of other Marvel movies. Okay, and this was the first DCEU movie. This was the first Superman. This was the second Superman reboot. And this one was successful. Thanks to Zack Snyder. Zack Snyder. Yeah, the person you guys like to hate, Zack Snyder. Yeah, it was him. It was him. Alright? And as much as people say Zack Snyder, he doesn't get Superman, blah, 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 yada, yada. He definitely did, because otherwise this thing would have been a box office flop. However, sadly, Bryan Singer, he didn't get Superman. Okay? Right? I'm just saying. Okay. Now, Batman v Superman Dawn of Justice. Batman v Superman Dawn of Justice. And by the way, a lot of people admit that Man of Steel is one of their best DCEU movies, and it did not deserve the critical reception it got. Okay? And people say every time they rewatch Man of Steel, it gets better and better with each viewing because there's more things they see in the movie. Okay? Batman v Superman Dawn of Justice. Considered the worst superhero movie of all time, made more box office than Man of Steel did, made a slightly more profit than Man of Steel did, made less in domestic video sales than Man of Steel did, but still more than Captain America Civil War. Okay? And then the third film in the franchise was Suicide Squad. It made less than Batman v Superman, but more profit than Batman v Superman and Man of Steel. Is raking in more money into total domestic video sales so far. We'll see if it passes Man of Steel. I don't know if it will or won't. But the point is, this movie, yes, it critically, by the critics, at least on Rotten Tomatoes, it got a lower score than all of them. But when it comes to other things and other areas and other aspects, winning an Oscar And also, its list of accolades includes winning the Critics' Choice Awards for the Best Actress in an Action Movie by the Critics Association, winning the Hollywood Music and Media Awards, winning the Makeup Artists and Hairstylists Guild Award, and also winning the Nickelodeon Kids' Choice Award for Favorite Soundtrack, as well as winning the People's Choice Awards for the Favorite Action Movie Actress and the Teens Choice Award for the Teens Anticipated Movie, the Best Teens Anticipated Movie. This movie has won a lot of positive accolades as well as some negative ones, don't get me wrong. So that when people say, oh, why did Suicide Squad win an Academy Award? It didn't deserve it, and it's a horrible movie. Well, guess what? A lot of people don't agree with you, and the accolades that this movie has gotten says that there is a rift here. There's a difference in opinion between the critics and the audience. And remember, the audience, 63% of them on Rotten Tomatoes like this movie, which is a significant amount again. So truly, this movie is not rotten. It has to have elements that make it good. And the fact of it is, Suicide Squad has rewatchability because, as we can see already, it surpassed every single so-called good movie so far, except for Man of Steel. It surpassed Civil War and so much. There's a lot of demand for this movie because people like the movie. They like it. And if somebody likes a movie, it's good. It doesn't matter what you think. You may think, oh, it doesn't have a proper story arc. It doesn't have enough plot. It doesn't have enough story. That's your opinion. The audience's opinion is what matters in this thing. It's not what you think when you went to film school and you feel films need to be done this way or that way. Now, Wonder Woman. Wonder Woman currently has great critical reviews, and that will probably help it at the box office. Okay? It will help it. No doubt about it. It's a reality. People look at Rotten Tomatoes and they try to figure out if they should go see this movie or not based on what critics think. Even though there are just a few people, they think these people are much more qualified than themselves. It's what it is. But people are less and less depending on that. Obviously, Suicide Squad is a perfect example of that. People go see what they want to see now. But at the end of the day, what I will say is Wonder Woman is the first DCEU movie to get a fresh critical score. But I want to just point out a couple other things as I'm there at it, okay? The first thing I want to point out is that Wonder Woman has borrowed the character development and focused it mainly on Wonder Woman. It's focused on Princess Diana straight throughout. Whereas Batman v Superman did not focus on Batman or Superman. It focused on the plot, and the plot thread moved throughout. For the theatrical cut, that is. So the movie was not linear at all. Wonder Woman is a linear movie. Suicide Squad was also not a linear movie, but it was character-driven, character-centered. You will focus on the characters, you cared about them. With Wonder Woman, you focus on the characters, you care about them, you focus mostly on Wonder Woman and her story. And also it has a plot, and it's linear. So I think these are the only things that they really tweaked in essence, if I was to take the big picture. And that allowed people not only to follow the movie, but to invest themselves emotionally into the movie, and that carried through to the end of the movie. And I think that's the thing that Warner Bros. Learned from doing Man of Steel and all these other movies. And Man of Steel was also a fantastic movie, but they focused on, yes, they did focus on Clark Kent, but at times they wandered off from focusing from him. You know, the origin story. Whereas with Wonder Woman, you went directly from the get-go, you were focused on Wonder Woman, and they never took their eyes off of Wonder Woman. It was straight true. It was all about her. So they learned how to stay focused on something and still have the elements that Zack Snyder has. And that definitely Wonder Woman is a Zack Snyder film. It's a Zack Snyder film. Zack Snyder does dramas and tragedies. You look at every single Zack Snyder film, every single one, it's a drama and a tragedy. And this movie was no different. It was a drama, it was a tragedy. But the directing of Patty Jenkins was what made the difference in this film. And that she was able to still have that heaviness. This movie is very heavy, Wonder Woman. But she was able to counter that heaviness with some inspiration. Just the way how she did the soundtracks, just how she did the movie. In that respect, she countered the heaviness and the seriousness of the movie with some comedy here, sprinkles of little comedy. It wasn't a comedy fest, and it wasn't a comedy for comedy's sake. The action in this movie, it was not an action movie. It was a drama with action in it, like Batman v Superman. the action had a purpose to it. It had a certain particular purpose to assist the story of the movie and drive the character's development, which was Wonder Woman, onwards. And so it had action, it had adventure, but the adventure in this movie again was with purpose. There was a specific purpose. Everything was very focused. Patty Jenkins was very focused from the beginning. She focused your attention on specific things in this movie, and that is what made her very successful. Whereas Batman v Superman was story focused, but not any individual character focused, so that people who could not I'm talking about the theatrical cut, so that people who could not follow the plot of the story, or they were not active thinkers, they would have a lot of problems following the story and therefore being attached to any of the characters, and so they would be distracted by other things. Man of Steel was also sort of character focused, but at times it would wander off from the character to another character. So you kind of had all these different, and story focus, plot focus, but so you move from one character to the next. You might move to Lois Lane, but then you would connect back to Clark Kent, but through a plot device instead of staying with Clark Kent all the way through the movie. All right, Wonder Woman, you stay with Diana all the way through the movie, all the way from the beginning. She's the one telling the story, and you are seeing it from her eyes, and you're seeing it through her eyes all the way through the story. And that's what gave that tremendous emotional impact throughout this movie, because this movie was incredibly emotional. And it wasn't you had sprinkles of humor and you had sprinkles of action, but when you think about this movie is, its message is an emotional message which you will align with. It will force you to align with this emotional message about war and about humanity. So it's exceptionally well done in that respect. All right, guys. So for those people who say, "Oh, this is a real superhero movie," and this is a great superhero, it's because Patty Jenkins tweaked you. She stirred up your emotions. She made you feel something. But it's not that this movie, Wonder Woman, did anything different to what Superman was doing in Batman v Superman, or Superman did in Man of Steel. It's just that she really focused this movie, and she said, "This is where you need to pay attention." She made you feel things, okay? She got you really focused in on the character of Diana, so you really cared about anybody that was associated with Diana. Anybody Diana met or talked or said something to, you were feeling it, right? So that's all that Patty Jenkins actually did. Excellent director. She's phenomenal when it comes to that. I'll talk more about the review of this movie and where I rank it among the DCEU films. I'll get to that in a minute. But yes, the DCEU does not need saving. However, Warner Bros. Has gathered their data. They have made their adjustments. Like I said, this is definitely a Zack Snyder production. This is a Zack Snyder film. Zack's hands are all over this film, okay? But I will say that the directing by Patty Jenkins, all right? The acting's always spot on in most DCEU movies. The directing by Patty Jenkins made Wonder Woman the movie that it is. It didn't hurt that she was a woman, that Gal Gadot was the first representation of Wonder Woman in movies. All of these things really worked in her favor. That, feminism and just the fact that this movie is speaking about women would kind of have Hollywood think a little bit twice about it. But it also has surprises for those who haven't watched all the trailers and the theatrical cuts and be watching everything, everything they can see, TV spots and stuff. I kind of spoiled myself by watching a little too much stuff. So I was kind of spoiled going into the movie. But it didn't, while I didn't get the full blow of the wow factor, I can tell you that I still, oh man, I almost cried a couple times. My eyes actually filled up with tears a couple times in this movie. And it's, I know why, but I'll tell you guys more about it, all right? All right, you guys, have a great one.